Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual, man. And we're going to continue this We Done with the 90s. And this one, we're going to do We Done with the 90s, the Defensive Player of the Year Award edition. That's right, guys. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Remember, I did the We Are Done with the 90s All-Star Game edition. We Are Done with the 90s Dream Team edition. I did We Are Done with the 90s the Specialist edition. Now we're going to do We Are Done with the 90s the Defensive Player of the Year Award edition, guys. And we're going to talk about how the guys who have won Defensive Player of the Year awards or the great defensive players of this era, the 2010s into the 2020s, can't hold anything, right? Of the guys who won Defensive Player of the Year awards in the 90s or the guys that were considered the great defensive players of the 90s. We're going to make the comparison, guys, and we're going to expose this era as being so much weaker than the previous era, guys. And you want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states, everyone that's been supporting my channel. Shout out to everybody who's ever donated money to my channel, the super chats, the super thanks, everyone coming to the live streams, everyone in the membership, everyone across the world, everyone across the states. I am truly humble, guys. Thank you very much, man. My channel's nothing without you guys, man. We must continue to stand up, set the record straight, man. So thank you to all you guys out there, man. I'm truly, truly humble, man. Like I said, everybody in the membership, thank you for your continued support, guys. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. Excuse me, guys. Let me get some water real quick, man. You guys know I be yelling. So, yes, guys. Like I said, we are going to do We Done with the 90s, the Defensive Player of the Year Award edition, guys. That's right, the Defensive Player of the Year Awards. And, you know, on this channel, I've told you guys many, many times that if we think about some of the players that have won some of these significant awards over the last 10 years, right, this transition from the late 2010s into the 2020s, if we think about some of these players, I've told you guys, it exposes this idea that previous eras are weaker than this era. When you have guys like Russell Westbrook winning MVPs and James Harden winning MVPs, I tell you guys all the time, they would not win MVPs in previous eras like the 80s or the 90s. They just would not. Right? So it exposes the quote-unquote skills, right, or the talents of this era. When those kinds of players are able to win MVP awards, when we know for damn sure they would not win MVP awards in previous eras. They just would not. But there's also things another thing that I've also told you guys also on this channel is about the defensive ability of some of these players, right? And we've highlighted like some of the guys who are considered great defensive players of this era would not be great defensive players in previous eras, right? We think about the 90s, right? And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We Done with the 90s, the Defensive Player of the Year Award edition, because for me, when we think about the guys who have won Defensive Player of the Year awards in the 90s or guys who were known as great defensive players of that era, when you compare them to the guys who have won Defensive Player of the Year awards or guys who are known as great defensive players in this era, this is where they get exposed once again, guys. They get exposed. So let's think about this now. Let's go down the line here. And I wrote these guys down. I wrote down a bunch of names. Like I said, guys who won Defensive Player of the Year awards or guys who were known as great defensive players of these eras, right? The 90s or that late 2010s into that 2020s, right? This transition is what we're talking about here. So let's think about some of these players, guys. So now, obviously, you know, we all know the obvious names, right? Gary Payton, Hakeem Olajuwon, right? Dikembe Mutombo, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Dennis Rodman, Karl Malone, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Joe Dumars, Mookie Blaylock. These are some of the names I wrote down. These are some of the greatest defensive players of the 90s, guys. Of the 90s, right? We think about some of these guys. Now, let's compare some of these guys to, or those guys I just mentioned, to some of the guys who are known as great defensive players of this era, guys. Right? So we have the Draymond Greens, the Kawhi Leonard, Joakim Noah, Marc Gasol, Rudy Gobert, Giannis, Marcus Smart, Ben Simmons, right, was known as a great defensive player, Roy Hibbert, Serge Ibaka, and Anthony Davis. I wrote these guys down. Those are guys, like I said, these are all the top of my head, guys. I didn't go down and think of, these are just the guys, the main guys that you guys get the deal here. Now, just off the top, when you guys hear me read those names off, you guys listen to me read off the names from the guys of the 90s. Off the jump, you can already tell it's a joke. These guys do not hold up to the greatness of the defensive players of the 90s, guys. Just some of the 90s here, not focusing on any other eras. Right now, We Done with the 90s, the Defensive Player of the Year Award edition, right? They love to attack the 90s. But once again, this is where they get exposed. They've actually exposed themselves with this slogan because all it does is really allow us to highlight the greatness of these players. So let's think about this now. And of all the guys that I read off for the new players, who's the greatest defensive player on that list? Probably Kawhi Leonard, right? You would say Kawhi Leonard is hands down the greatest defensive player of his era. You can make that argument, right? He's got a couple Defensive Player of the Year award wins at that small forward position. Kawhi Leonard is known in this era as one of the great two-way players, right? He can hit you in the mid-range, right? He's got the offensive skills, and he's known for being a really good lockdown defensive player. Now, that's all true. Kawhi Leonard is a great defensive player. But when we think about the totality of the defensive players from the 90s and the late 2010s into the 2020s, right? Kawhi Leonard's one name. He's one name, guys. Now, would Kawhi Leonard win a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s? I don't know. Because if Scottie Pippen never won a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s, then we could damn sure make an argument that Kawhi Leonard's not winning a Defensive Player of the Year in the 90s. We can make that argument. We can make it. Does he get one? Maybe he does. I'm not saying that he would not get one definitively, but you can make an argument that he would not get one based off of the fact that Scottie Pippen never won one, and Kawhi Leonard and Scottie Pippen's defensive ability, I'm not talking about the two-way play of them, their defensive abilities are pretty much even. I would even argue that Scottie Pippen's a more tenacious defensive player. He gave more effort on the defensive end consistently, right? He had the dimensions. He didn't have the big hands maybe of a Kawhi Leonard, but he had the long arms, the defensive ability, the quick feet, like I said, the tenacity on the defensive end. So if Scottie Pippen never won Defensive Player of the Year award, we can argue that Kawhi Leonard is not winning a Defensive Player of the Year award. Not saying that he would not win one. You could make that argument, right? And that's supposed to be the greatest defensive player of this era. We can make an argument that he would not even win a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s over guys like Dikembe Mutombo, right? Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Scottie Pippen, Gary Payton, Michael Jordan, right? These are the great defensive players. Patrick Ewings, these guys. Is he winning an award over them? I don't know. It's an argument. Let's go down again. Draymond Green, another guy who's considered one of the great defensive players of this era. Now, I will definitely say for certain, Draymond Green is not sniffing a Defensive Player of the Year award, guys, in the 90s. He's not. Draymond Green is a solid defensive player for this era. To me, Kawhi Leonard's defensive ability will translate into other eras. For me, I do not believe Draymond Green, first of all, he's not big enough to play the position he plays in this weak soft era in the 90s. He, at that size, 6'5", 6'6", whatever the hell he is, he's not going to be effective against some of these other great players. These big men, he's not. He's not banging against Karl Malone all day or Charles Barkley all day. He's not doing this, right? So for me, Draymond Green's defensive abilities in this era, right? He's only really great in this era to me, Draymond Green. He's not a great athlete, Draymond Green. He could barely jump. He doesn't have the great physical gifts, like the long arms, none of this stuff. He doesn't have that. Right? The one thing that Draymond Green does have is he gives the effort on the defensive end. We'll give him that. We'll give him the effort on the defensive end. And yes, he does have some defensive skills. But once again, it's highlighted in this era. In the previous era, like the 90s, Draymond Green is going to be exposed going against these guys, the more athletic wing players. Because really, who is he guarding? Is he guarding small forwards? Is he guarding shooting guards? Is he guarding the power forwards and the centers? Hell no. So I don't think Draymond Green translates into the 90s. So right there, to me, Draymond Green's not winning a Defensive Player of the Year award over any of the guys I just mentioned. Pippen, Jordan, Hakeem, Robinson, Ewing, Rodman, none of these guys. Joakim Noah. I love Joakim number 2. Once again, Joakim Noah gave the effort. He played with a lot of hustle and intensity. He's one of those grit guys, those glue guys. I respect him. Once again, though, I do not believe Joakim Noah is winning a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it, guys. He's not winning over these other all-time great centers. Joakim Noah, defensive ability, compared to these other guys, he's a great defensive player, once again, for his era, but not in the 90s, guys. He's not going to be better than Patrick Ewing, right? And Patrick Ewing's one of the lesser guys because he was behind David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Dikembe Mutombo, Alonzo Mourning. Every year he's going against these all-time great defensive centers. This is why Patrick Ewing only has 3 defensive teams. Right? People might look at them and go, oh, Patrick Ewing wasn't that great of a defensive player. No, Patrick Ewing was very stout defensively. The problem was he's behind the legendary defensive players like Mutombo, Hakeem, David. These guys are considered top 5, top 10 all-time great defensive players. Hakeem, David Robinson, Mutombo. Come on. So Joakim Noah, to me, is not winning a Defensive Player of the Year award. He's not going to be one of the great defensive players of the 90s. But he won one in the 2010s into the 2020s era. Marc Gasol, another one that you know the LeBron James fans love to bring up. Oh, Marc Gasol robbed LeBron James of his Defensive Player of the Year award. I keep telling these people, you're telling me that LeBron James only played in the NBA one season? That was the only year that LeBron James was eligible to win the Defensive Player of the Year award? You said they tried to sell that one season that LeBron James gave effort continuously or consistently on the defensive end. You want to talk about one season? What about all the other years LeBron James played? He could have won Defensive Player of the Year award in any of those seasons. But once again, that also exposes LeBron James the fact that he was not able to win a Defensive Player of the Year award in this weak era. So Marc Gasol won one. Is Marc Gasol winning a Defensive Player of the Year award, guys, in the 90s? No, he's not. And this is no disrespect to Marc Gasol. He's a very stout defensive player. These are no knocks on these guys. This is the comparisons from we done with the 90s. You see the difference in guys and defensive abilities, right? The defensive presence of these guys. Marc Gasol is not on the level of Hakeem, David Robinson, Mutombo, Patrick Ewing, the other big, Karl Malone. No, give me those guys over Marc Gasol. He's not winning a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s. Rudy Gobert, who many people will consider the greatest shot blocker of his era. Rudy Gobert, right? What has he got, 3 or 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards? It's a joke, man. Rudy Gobert. Now, once again, Rudy Gobert, is no disrespect to him, man. He's a quality shot blocker in this weak, soft era, man. No doubt about it. But once again, this era is soft. Rudy Gobert is soft. Come on, man. Just stop it. Rudy Gobert winning that many Defensive Player of the Year awards in the 90s. Essentially, he's the Dikembe Mutombo of his era. Give me Dikembe Mutombo all day, every day over Rudy Gobert. Just give it to me. Like I said, these guys were tougher. They had more heart, more grit. Right? Rudy Gobert to me is soft. And like I said, yeah, he's a good shot blocker for his era. But Rudy Gobert's not winning Defensive Player of the Year awards over these guys. The Hakeems, the Patrick Ewings, the David Robinsons, the Mutombos, the Alonzo Mournings. He's not winning over these guys. No way in hell. No way, man. I don't give a damn what anybody says. Those are the facts. Who is Rudy Gobert going against in this weak era? What centers is he guarding? No one. Not impressed. We think about Giannis. Now, Giannis maybe could translate into the 90s. However, once again, Giannis won a Defensive Player of the Year award during a COVID bubble season, not taking anything away from him, where he averaged 1 block and 1 steal. That's what he averaged, 1 block and 1 steal. Those numbers are not impressive. And listen, it's not just about the numbers. We're talking about your defensive impact. Giannis is a great hustle guy. He's a great athlete, right? He's able to, react, right, on the pick and rolls. We think about that block he had against the Phoenix Suns in the finals, right, when he was able to recover and block DeAndre Ayton. This is Giannis's specialty as it pertains to his defensive prowess. But to me, once again, Giannis gets exposed in this era. Going against who? Who are you going against in this era? There's no real great big men. I would love to see Giannis going against Hakeem Olajuwon or Karl Malone, right? Some of his other great power forwards, some of his other great big men. I would love to see him bang and go against these guys down low. Unfortunately, we're never going to see that. But Giannis is a quality defensive player. But to me, is he going to be the greatest defensive player in the 90s? No, he's not. He's going to be just another really good defensive player. Marcus Smart now. Now, this to me is when they get exposed. Once again, this era gets exposed. Marcus Smart. Now, listen, like I said, no disrespect. Marcus Smart, one of those guys, he hustles. He gives the effort on defense. No doubt about it, man. He's one of those grit guys, one of those glue guys, right? We think about Marcus Smart ripping Kevin Durant all over the court in that 2022 playoff series against the Brooklyn Nets. Marcus Smart was ripping Kevin Durant left and right. I told you, Kevin Durant was exposed there. But let's be real. Once again, Marcus Smart won a Defensive Player of the Year award, the first point guard to win a Defensive Player of the Year award since Gary Payton in 1996. Does anyone believe that Marcus Smart's winning a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s over a Gary Payton, over a Michael Jordan, over a Scottie Pippen, over a Joe Dumars, over a Dennis Rodman? Do we believe this? Hell no. Hell no. And Marcus Smart's one of the great defensive guards of his era, right? Of this era. He's not that in the 90s. He's going to be a good defensive player, absolutely. But he's not going to be one of the elite defensive players in the 90s. No way in hell, man. No way, guys. Once again, this era is exposed when we think about the guys who have won Defensive Player of the Year awards, the great defensive players of this era. It's a laughingstock, guys. This thing about someone I told you guys, I mentioned now these are just guys I mentioned. I mentioned Ben Simmons, right, for his defensive prowess. He was known for his defensive prowess. Ben Simmons. Oh, the Ben Simmons could win. They remember he was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year award like every year when he was, when he was playing. Right, Ben Simmons, man. And to me, Ben Simmons' defense is way, way overrated, man. I don't know where people get these, this idea that he's this all-time great or this really great defensive player. He's a good defensive player, right? He had the size, right, at that position, right? Playing the point guard position at that size, 6'10", with the arms and the athleticism, right? Yeah, he was a solid defensive player. But once again, Ben Simmons is not elite defensively. He's not. He's not, because he's not consistent, and he never developed anything. And once again, who is he going against? This era exposes these guys. So Ben Simmons, to me, is not going to be one of the elite defensive players in the 90s. He's not, I told you, he wouldn't even be in the NBA in the 90s. He would not, because he doesn't have any fundamentals, which is why he's pretty much done. His career is pretty much done. He collected all the money he wants, right? He's a clown. I told you guys about Ben Simmons. He's a joke, man, but he was known as one of the great defensive players, guys. Would not be that in the 90s. Serge Ibaka, one of the great shot blockers of this era. No knock on Serge Ibaka, man. Great athlete, good shot blocker. But in the 90s, he's not one of those guys, man. He's just not. Roy Hibbert, another guy that we mentioned. Roy Hibbert's not that guy in the 90s. Once again, this is who LeBron is going against in the Indiana Pacers. Paul George and Roy Hibbert. One of the most unathletic black people I've ever seen in the history of my life, man. Roy Hibbert has no athleticism. Just a goofy black dude out there, man. He's a goofball out there, man. The long arms, the goofy body, the goofy look he always on his face, man. He was a klutz out there, man. Not impressed with Roy Hibbert being one of the top defensive players. So, guys, listen, as you can see, man, and Anthony Davis, we could throw out there. Anthony Davis is a really great defensive player. The problem for Anthony Davis is what? The problem for Anthony Davis is his durability. We all know that he's very frail. Is Anthony Davis going to be one of the great players in the 90s? No, he's too frail to play in the 90s. Even though he is a great two-way player, his availability is suspect. And like I said, his grit, his heart, his toughness is not there for him to be that kind of level player in the 90s. I do not believe he would have been one of those great players. Having to bang against legit big men every single game, he would have folded up. But think about Anthony Davis has never even won a Defensive Player of the Year award. I believe he's finished runner-up several times, but he's never even won a Defensive Player of the Year award. Right? That's crazy to me, man. So, guys, as you can see, man, we done with the 90s, the Defensive Player of the Year award edition. I know this video's going a little bit long, but look at the guys that I read off. Do you believe that any of these guys in this current era, from the 2010s into the 2020s, the Jaren Jackson Jr.'s, right? Do you believe, the Draymond Greens, the Rudy Goberts, right? These guys of this current era. Do you guys really believe that these guys are winning all these Defensive Player of the Year awards, or they're even winning a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s? I mean, listen to these names. You're talking about Hakeem Olajuwon, who's arguably the greatest defensive player in the history of the game. You can make that argument for Hakeem Olajuwon, right? No one's making an argument for any of these guys to be the greatest defensive players of all time. Nobody is. Hakeem Olajuwon, you can make that argument. David Robinson, once again, arguably a top 5 defensive player in NBA's history. David Robinson in the 90s. We think about Gary Payton, one of the greatest defensive point guards, if not the greatest defensive point guard in the history of the game. I told you, he's up there with guys like Walt Clyde Frazier, Dennis Johnson, Jason Kidd. Like, to me, Gary Payton, they're in that conversation of the greats, the great of the greats. Marcus Smart's not in that conversation, guys. He's not. But he won Defensive Player of the Year award in his era. Not sniffing one in the 90s, guys. Michael Jordan. We think about Michael Jordan. No, Michael Jordan never won a Defensive Player of the Year award in the 90s, but he was runner-up several times in the 90s, and we all know he's one of the great defensive players of the 90s. He's one of the great defensive players in NBA's history. Easily, you can argue Michael Jordan's top 5, easily top 10, greatest defensive player in NBA's history, guys, easily. To me, Michael Jordan's the greatest two-way player in NBA's history. The greatest two-way player. That's my opinion. Michael Jordan. That's the 90s, y'all. We think about Scottie Pippen. Once again, Scottie Pippen, all-time great defensive player. Or any of these guys greater than Scottie Pippen? Like I told you, you can argue Kawhi Leonard, no doubt about it. But who are the other guys? To me, no. Scottie Pippen's better than Draymond Green. He's better than all these other guys. Patrick Ewing, like I said, who's a lesser defensive player of his era because he was, playing against other great defensive guys. To me, Patrick Ewing in this era, he has 3 or 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. He's better than Rudy Gobert. Give me Patrick Ewing over Rudy Gobert any day, guys. I'm going with Patrick Ewing. Got more heart, more grit, more toughness, than a Rudy Gobert. I'm going with Patrick Ewing over him. Dennis Rodman. Is anybody better than Dennis Rodman at defense of this era? Is anybody better? Like I said, you want to argue Kawhi Leonard with me? I don't know, guys. To me, Dennis Rodman's more versatile. He's more durable. He's more consistent. He's there. He shows up. He don't need the load managing, right? So his defensive longevity is much greater. That's the problem for Kawhi Leonard. He doesn't have the defensive longevity as someone like a Michael Jordan, a Scottie Pippen, a Dennis Rodman, a Hakeem Olajuwon, David. Like, these guys were consistently great for like a decade. Kawhi Leonard's been out here, back there, missing games then. The consistency hasn't been there, right? Like those guys. I mean, Joe Dumars. I mean, like, to me, these guys are just greater defensive players, guys. This is when the era gets exposed. This is when it gets exposed, and this is what we're talking about when we say the guys in the previous eras, the 80s and the 90s, these guys played defense. But not only did they play defense, they were legendary defensive players. These are not okay defensive guys or great for their era. These guys are all-time great defensive players. All-time great. When you talk about Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Dikembe Mutombo, Scottie Pippen, right? Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman. These are some of the greatest defensive players at their positions in the history of the game, guys. The history of the game. That's the 90s. Just the 90s we're talking about here. It exposes these guys from the 2010s into this 2020s. It exposes them. You guys know the deal, man. We must continue to set the record straight, stop the lies, stop the narratives, hold these guys to a standard, right? These guys do not even give the effort like guys gave back in the day. So even some of the lesser defensive players, they gave more effort than the guys today. It's about the effort that they give. It's not about the physicality so much, right, because they've changed the rules. It's about the effort that these guys gave on a nightly basis consistently. They didn't take off games here and there. They didn't load manage here and there to save themselves and be great defensively or duck out against this guy. Hakeem Olajuwon wasn't ducking David Robinson, right? Patrick Ewing wasn't ducking Alonzo Mourning. They all played against each other. They battled, and they earned it. This is why we respect these guys. So once again, we done with the 90s Defensive Player of the Year Award edition, guys. You see, once again, the 90s era of defensive players are on a whole nother stratosphere compared to the guys of this era. Those are just the facts, y'all. I'll catch you guys on the next one.